Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. Excited to be back today with another client interview for you guys. And today we have Yash on with us. I'm really excited to be talking to Yash today about his recruiting process because he actually just started his summer internship and is taking time out of his busy day at work to talk to us. And so super appreciative of that. But Yash, worked with us on his interview prep and was able to get a very cool offer by the end of it, which I'll let him kind of share with you guys on his own. But I just want to get him to come on here, especially as a student in Canada. Like we always get a lot of people asking us too, like, oh, can you guys help people in Canada? And obviously, I would say the vast majority of our students that we work with are in the US because we're based in the US, not because we don't like our Canadian friends, but just like that's where we're based. And also it's like there's a lot more students in the US trying to go for go work in banking and the buy side and finance in general. And so it's a bigger market, but nonetheless, we have worked with a smaller amount of Canadian students, but most of them have been very successful, just like Yash has been. So want to get him come on here, share like the kind of his perspective as a Canadian student, and also just like how he got the offer that he got, so that hopefully if you guys are listening to this, maybe you're also a Canadian student, it can help you with your own recruiting process as well. Because I know there's also some nuances in terms of how Canadian firms recruit versus how US firms recruit. So with that said, let's just dive right in. Yash, again, thank you so much for being here with us today. And to start off, maybe you can kind of just introduce yourself real quick, give people a sense of who you are as a person, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the details of your recruiting process.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Sam. So a little bit of a background about myself. I'm actually I just finished my third year at Queen's University. So I go to Smith School of Business, focused on finance, wanted to do finance pretty much for my first year, but because I'm an international student, we don't really have the same amount of resources as like a domestic student, which kind of made me a little confused as to how would I, approach my end goal. To give a little bit of what I did before, I guess joining Wall Street Mastermind, I joined all the investment clubs on campus, got promoted there from analyst to portfolio manager, network with people in the industry, did my classic, Buse Wall Street Oasis prep. But during the entire prep, I noticed that, there was a huge discrepancy between what you were learning in the guides versus what were the actual conversations that people were having. And I think a big highlight for that when I was, coffee chatting with people, and I noticed I was not on the same page with them in terms of, the pace or the speed they were talking about stuff. For example, multiples would be one, or just accounting in general. So having those things on your fingertips was like a big, I guess, the gray area for me that wasn't covered for my prep before. As to what I'm doing currently, so I'm currently interning at a family office here in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we manage I'm not allowed to disclose, but in billions, and it's we deal with a bunch of asset classes, be it in the private side or the public side. So there's a very holistic exposure in terms of what I get at the job. In terms of, I guess, just, a bit of my background, just a little bit in depth to sort of, I guess, help pan it out a bit. I was since the first day that I joined, school, like college. So Queens is like a target school here in Canada, and I wanted to, I guess, target Canadian banks or just Canadian financial institutions. And the big issue here is because Canada is a much smaller market, you have a lot lower, I guess, shots in terms of getting it wrong. So you really have to get it right from the get-go, because one bad call can lead to another. So there's a domino effect with it. What I did in terms of that prep, I already covered before, but I think just to give a little bit of an insight into that, I used to be a firm believer that, finance or anything of like high performing fields that require a lot of attention to detail, require you to just, grind it out on your own and just sit down and, go through the guides and just really rote memorize everything. And I think that was something that I lost a lot of time on, because you're naturally not going to learn something just because you read it 4 times. I think that's where Sam came in. So I had looked around. I was like, I was having a chat with my dad and a couple of mentors, and I wanted to, I wonder if there's a resource that I can actually get my answers corrected, or, figure out why can I not this piece add up. And that is
Mm,
after exhausting even reaching out to finance professors. And one of the big thing is they're academic professionals. So they, there's a discrepancy between the market and what the academics think.
mm,
And that's something you don't realize as a young professional.
yeah,
Um, so I got on with Sam, I think last summer. So in my previous summer, I worked as a corp dev intern at Constellation Software. So it's one of the largest um, uh, sort of it's kind of like Alphabet, so it's kind of not actually a software company, but it's like an acquisition model.
mm,
So it's basically owning a lot of subsidiaries. So I worked there, got a lot of exposure in corp dev, but still was not very sure as to where I wanted to go in finance.
yeah.
And I connected with Sam. I forget his name right now, but I think it's there was a person I connected before Sam that was also my age and intern. I think it was Zoilo. It was Zoilo, so I got
Right,
in
right,
touch. Right.
right. Yeah. You
Yeah,
talked to
so I got
Zoila. Yep.
so I got in touch with Zoilo. He spoke volumes about his experience with Sam and looked very promising. So took it off from there, and I got enrolled in the Wall Street Mastermind program.
Yeah.
And not only just the technical aspect, but also what I really wanted to do was really, really, I guess, personalized to my coaching.
Yeah.
And I got in touch with a lot of mentors through the program, got to know exactly what I wanted to do in the Canadian space, particularly.
Yeah.
And here I am. Yeah,
That's awesome. I have so many follow-up questions I want to ask you based
sure,
on everything you
for
just
sure.
said. So let's go through them kind of like one at a time. But
Mhm,
you mentioned in the beginning you're an international student,
mhm,
right? So I know like here in the US, being an international student makes things a lot more difficult because
mhm,
sponsorship in the US for visas is very hard to get,
for
right?
sure.
How is that in Canada? Like I've always been under the impression that like the Canadian government is a bit more friendlier
Mhm,
to international students than the
mhm.
US government, but like as someone who actually went through it yourself, like talk to us about kind of some of the challenges of being an international student in Canada. Like how much harder is it?
Mhm,
Is it harder at all? Or like
mhm,
kind of walk us through that?
mhm. I think so. There's two layers to the question by itself. So definitely Canada is it's a much better place if you're an international student and you're trying to look for full-time opportunities or internships compared to the U.S. Just given how friendly the government is with the whole visa application stuff.
Yeah.
But there's definitely certain challenges. And I think these apply more to finance or consulting. So, to get to the high performing jobs, naturally there's much lesser jobs or positions available to begin with, and that
Mm,
adds to the whole competition aspect to it. And I think a second thing is that because you're so the way that the visa just works for students is that you're allowed to work on cycle internships, but not off cycle internships.
mm,
So if you don't get a strong start from the first year, say your first summer, or don't get into the right clubs or whatnot, if your profile is just not as strong, it becomes very, very difficult to, get your foot in the industry. And that added a whole layer to my problems because I was driven, I was hungry, and I'd like to think, I was just as smart as my peers, but the opportunities just did not seem at the same level in terms of equalizing the game. However, that being said, one of the challenges that for me was that when I got on with Sam, I started seeing a lot of opportunities pop up, and one of the ones was there's huge pension fund called PSP Investments, and I was able to secure like a fall opportunity there. But just because of my whole visa situation, I just wasn't able to take it up because it just didn't allow that.
So to clarify, you're saying in Canada, if you're
Hmm.
an international student, like
Hmm.
when we say on cycle versus off cycle, basically you're saying you
Hmm.
can only do internships during the summer when you're not in school, but
Yeah.
you cannot intern like in
Hmm.
the fall or the spring when you're actually taking classes.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the whole going to a target school. So there's another caveat to that. So what happens in Canada is that the target school, so we're thinking Queen's, Ivy, or say Rotman or McGill, with the exception of Rotman a tad bit, these schools, because of their elite, I guess, name on the street, they don't really have any co-op programs. So co-op programs, there's certain schools out there that specifically offer you visa, I guess, workarounds to work these off-cycle internships, but there's a whole challenge that you're not like target, right? So that was one of the biggest issues. So I was at a target school, but because of my visa situations, I was not able to convert those
Hmm.
opportunities.
That's
So
interesting. So as an international student in Canada, do you think it's like given the choice between the two, is it more favorable then to still be a target school student, or would you say it's more favorable to be a non-target school student?
that's
But
the thing. It's if we were to sort of look at a more statistical point of view, you're definitely looking at 80 to 85% of the street being like Queens or Ivy graduates. Like my
Mm,
firm, like to just to look at it, I think we've had like one person that's not from Queens or Ivy, but everybody else is from there. So,
mm,
but I'm definitely seeing a bit of a shift that's happening lately. So a lot of the, I wouldn't say not target schools, but semi-target schools that were not in the same, I guess, tier before have sort of gained that same level of competitiveness through these co-op programs because a lot of, the fall or the winter internships, because they're not targeted by the target university students, it gets a lot more competitive. So naturally, they're placing a lot better than it used to
mm.
before. So it's kind of equalizing a bit.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
then if you're a target, but so your classmates
Hmm.
at Queens
Hmm.
who are not international student, most
Hmm.
of them are still doing off-cycle internships. And so it's just like they can
Yeah.
do off-cycle internships and you can't, so their resume is
Hmm.
better than yours.
For sure. Yeah, that was the biggest challenge for me that um I guess if I didn't have, I could have unlocked a lot more doors, just given the amount of effort that was gone into the whole process.
Gotcha. Okay. So yeah, that's definitely a huge obstacle. And it's almost like you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back,
For
basically.
sure. Yeah, it's very frustrating.
um, so that's great to hear that you, I mean, obviously you still ended up being very successful. And so that's, I'm sure you did a lot of things right around along the way. I guess the other thing that you kind of talked about, so you obviously ultimately ended up at this family office that you're working at now.
Mhm.
And by the way, for people who aren't familiar with this term family office, just to explain for our audience, like family office is basically just like usually really wealthy. Let's say you're a billionaire or whatever, and you have a family office managing your own money, right? So it's almost like a hedge fund that's dedicated to just managing your money and helping you get even more wealthier. I guess like that. That's like the way to put it, right? So like could be, they can invest in like different asset classes, could be hedge fund, could be PE like, could be venture capital, could be just like whatever they think is best, right? And so that's kind of what a family office is for the people that are kind of like not as familiar. But um, aside from this family office offer, which you obviously ultimately ended up taking, I think you had like several other offers that you were considering as well, right? So like walk us through kind of that whole decision making process in terms of like what were the alternatives and then why did you ultimately pick this one over all the other options that you had.
For sure. So I had so besides this offer, I had if my memory serves me right, this was I think four other offers, and they were all kind of somewhat related, but kind of different, I guess, operations of finance. So one of them was for corp dev. So I was definitely given my previous corp dev exposure as an M&A intern. That was something I was definitely interested in exploring because for the longest time, I thought that I wanted to do corp dev or M&A related stuff for as a long-term career. So that was one, and another one that I had was, I guess, a smaller boutique investment banking shop that was more focused on infrastructure and mining. And the third one that I had was just a more corporate finance role in general. And the fourth, sorry, the third one and then the fourth one was it was kind of a consulting slash advisory sort of a role that was related within the finance function of the company, but it wasn't like a finance firm. It was more of a general think
Mm,
your, uh, big Fortune 500 companies.
yeah.
And I think what led my decision to that was so definitely from the very get-go, I was very interested in investments, and there's the whole, I guess, common like path laid out for you that you go and do investment banking and then you move on to buy side. So definitely like before I got my buy side offer for internship, I was definitely going to take my IB one. But I think what led me to sort of have a change of heart was that because I eventually wanted to do buy side and investment management, and I found the opportunity to sort of give me exposure to different asset classes, I just was like, there's no way I'm going to leave this offer on the table. And
Mm,
just given the proximity, because our team's very small, we have like less than 10 people, so that proximity to the people that I'm working with was a huge thing for me to, in terms from like a mentorship perspective, because I realized that a good chunk of knowledge you get from finance is actually seeing and learning and also making sure you don't make the same mistakes again. So I
mm,
think that just allowed me to, get that mentorship aspect that I wouldn't have at, say, the bigger shops.
for sure.
Um, Right. And in terms of just, I guess, why this over all the other opportunities was just, three things. Buy side, I wanted to do something investment management related. Long term, that was just my goal. Second, I wanted to get mentorship in in terms of a long-term career. I wanted to start because I'm an international student, I'm much more vulnerable to, career pivots and just, having to map things on my own, and having less downtime because you can't go from job to job and then leave that period without visas. So that was one thing for sure. And then third was just having I guess that strong launch opportunity, because if you don't go to a target school, a lot of these opportunities just can't be availed. So I just did not want to squander that opportunity. So yeah.
Gotcha. Makes sense. So obviously that's great that I feel like you had a lot of different options and they
Hmm.
were all kind of slightly different
Hmm.
too.
Hmm.
And so like it's always good to have options and then be able to kind of like pick the one that's the best fit for you. And yeah, like a lot of people go into banking not even because they want to do banking, they go into banking so
Hmm.
they can go to the buy side. And so it's
Hmm.
like if you can
Hmm.
just go straight to the buy side and it's at
Hmm.
like a legitimate
Hmm.
fund, then it's like why not just
For
skip
sure.
the whole banking thing and go straight, right?
I agree.
So
I agree.
I think that's awesome. So okay, that makes a lot of sense. What what's the other thing I said? Okay, so the other thing is like you talked about like prior to joining Wall Street Mastermind,
Hmm.
sounds like you were basically just doing kind of the standard stuff
Hmm.
that everyone's typically doing, right? Like reading and memorizing the guides and it's primary. I think you said it was like the Wall Street Oasis guides, or
Hmm.
probably
Hmm.
like the Breaking into Wall Street guys, right? Like the 400 questions guy, like
Hmm.
all the same guys as everyone. Um, what what about that wasn't like enough for you, I
Hmm.
guess, like and I guess like this kind of segues into the other question, which is like you kind of talked about this a little bit. It was like what made you want to join Wall Street Mastermind, because I feel like you were doing the same things that most people were already doing,
Hmm.
right? And I
Hmm.
think a lot of people would look around and be like, how do I get into banking? Oh, well, let me see what everyone else that got into banking is doing. It's like, okay, everyone else is reading these guides.
Hmm.
Okay, then that's the way to get into banking. So let me just do that. And maybe that is how you started out initially. But then, like, obviously, you decided at some point, like, actually, you know what? This is not enough. Right. And so,
Hmm.
like, talk to me about that a little bit and, like, how, what caused you to kind of make that decision, I guess.
For sure. For sure. I guess the way I want to answer this in sort of three structures. So one was initially what I was doing and why I was doing it. Second, why I felt it didn't work out. And third, sort of comparing and contrasting those methods with when you actually get on the job versus when you're preparing for it and just the disadvantages associated with it. I think the first one is, um, I was, coming from an international background, and none of my parents, they worked in finance or anything nearly remotely connected to that. I was just, following the herd of just, what are my peers doing? What are my seniors doing? And there's this constant shoving down your throat that, if you want to be successful, you're going to know that Buse 400 guide like the back of your hand. You're sleeping and you need to know what's going on there.
Yeah.
And I think that's a novel pursuit for sure. Like there's, obviously they serve their purpose, but I think the biggest disadvantage with those guides was that you just don't understand what is actually going on. So like, what are accrued liabilities, and why do I care? What is networking capital? Why does that matter? So a lot of those fundamental guides that were fundamental structure that's required to understand what's going on was just not given there. And that was my biggest issue
Mm,
with these guides. And the reason I followed them to begin with was because everybody around me told me that, the reason they're successful is because they worked very hard to understand that guide. But when I looked into it as no, they networked, they knew the right people, they had the right internships on their stuff, and they happen to know the questions that they got through networking or actually, people working there before. So they really knew what they were going for. Um, and in terms of the second part, how I think it's sort of compares how that sort of shifts um in terms of preparation. Why I decided to sort of, I guess, venture away from that was because this is very interesting. This is particularly true for your program, Sam, is that you kind of have a very um meticulous way of planning out your content in the way of this is why we're doing it. You're not, this isn't to teach you how to do actual modeling, but understand how to, understand the intricate details of modeling and then also be able to do modeling.
Mm.
Whereas these views or the Wall Street Oasis guides are very much focused on, hey guys, here's an Excel video. I'm going to teach you how to do that, but then it's only applicable for this company and not for company Z, right? That was the biggest challenge that I faced. Second
Mm.
was a very interesting one is the modules that you had. I think that they were almost an eye opener for me. So I had done accounting, I got A+ for financial and managerial, I became a TA, but I didn't really understand what were the details applicable from the academic world to an actual deal.
Mm.
And you had a very beautiful way of explaining in real life concept of how these connect. And I think they were very, very instrumental in me dealing with tricky questions in interviews. That was the second one. And third one was how do all the pieces, how do all the, I guess, pieces, so your evaluation, your accounting, your multiples, your synergies, how do they actually piece in together and work for a model is very
Mm.
important from an interview perspective, and actually very helpful because the interviewer is going to go beyond those questions, right? They just want to pick your brain. And third, I think this is kind of getting like, speaking of my peers at other shops and just how they're doing it. I found there's a huge discrepancy between your performance in terms of when you actually when you do those courses, and then when you actually get on the job, you're like, what's going on? Like, the guide didn't tell me about this. And with Sam's course, I think I definitely found that difference to be a lot lesser. Obviously, as an intern, you have a lot to learn, but that transition was much easier for me to, what is my analyst actually talking about? Like, I'm able to think on the same level as he's thinking, right? And Sam's
Mm.
like courses and being able to ask questions on the platform that we have for asking questions and stuff, and asking for advice was really helpful for me to piece things together.
Mm.
um and lastly, I think one of the biggest advantages that if I had to compare the program versus these regular courses is that you really really understand what's happening. It sounds a lot more basic than it really is, but for you to understand, for you to go through an SEC filing and actually understand what's going on, I don't think those guides are just suffice to memorize and then you be able to bridge the gap.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I feel like everything you said is it all makes sense when you say it all together. It's like I feel like there's a common thread that kind of ties everything together, which is like the biggest difference coming out of this program versus doing what you were doing before is that coming out of this program, you've actually like truly internalized this knowledge to
Mhm.
the point where it's become like I call it like application knowledge, meaning like you're not just like you didn't just like memorize a bunch of formulas or like memorize the definition of certain
Mhm.
terms like accrued liabilities or whatever, but
Mhm.
it's like you actually can take what you learn
Mhm.
conceptually and you can actually like apply it on like in the real world setting and like do stuff with it, right?
For sure.
And that's actually like that's the level you have to get
Mhm.
to honestly to be able to pass these interviews nowadays, because I think that like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly, maybe 5 years ago, maybe not, but like 5, 10 years ago, it used to be enough where if you committed to memory like every answer in the 400 questions guide, like you probably pass your interviews,
For
right?
sure.
But over the years, like because that's just become so prevalent now, like I don't know if you can find a single person who's trying to break into investment banking or the buy side who has not
Mhm.
read the 400 questions guide,
I
right?
agree.
Like at this point, it's just common knowledge that like, hey, like you go ask anyone and they're like, oh, just read the 400 questions guide, right? And
Mhm.
so it's like, guess who else read the 400 questions guide? Your interviewers when they were coming up. And then like also like every year when they're interviewing these kids, they're starting to pick up that, oh, everyone's read these guides and everyone's already memorizing these answers. And so what are they not going to do? They're not going to just ask you the exact questions that
For
are from
sure.
the 400 questions guide, right? Because they're trying to figure out who's better and who's worse, and we want to hire the people that are the best, right?
Mhm.
And so that's where it's like you have to adapt to the times. It's like maybe something that worked 10 years ago or maybe even 5 years ago, like not just for investment banking or for buy side, but like with life in general. I find that over time, anything that's like highly desirable typically just becomes harder to get over time or more competitive. Like getting
Mhm.
into a good school
Hmm.
is way harder now than it was 10 years ago,
For
right?
sure.
Like getting into a good business school program, same thing. Like getting into banking, getting into like, MBB consulting, like everything just gets harder over time because your competition is getting better. There's
Hmm.
more information out there. Everyone has access to the information. So it's like information alone is it's not it's a commodity at this point,
I
right?
agree.
And
I've
so
said
I
that
think like
myself.
that's like the way we really try to teach the time is like, I mean, we don't make our students memorize any guides
Hmm.
actually.
Hmm.
And we the way we like to think about it is like you have to get to the point
Hmm.
where you can actually teach these concepts to other people,
Hmm.
like explain these concepts to other people. Like if you have a younger brother who's in sixth grade who has never touched finance at all,
Hmm.
can you explain to him like what a discounted cash flow is conceptually in like an easy and concise, easy to understand and concise manner, like in layman's terms, basically. And like a lot of people can't do that. Like they'll tell like, oh, DCF is like, yeah, first you calculate free cash flow, and then like, well, what's free cash flow? Like, and so it's like being able to explain that and teach it to someone who has no idea what finance is. Like, if you can do that, that's
Hmm.
the real test
I agree.
for whether you have that application knowledge, right? So I think like that's that's really like what we pride ourselves on in terms of like the technical training is like and what makes us different from everyone else is like I feel like most of the other resources out there, a lot of it's like it just comes down to like, oh yeah, just memorize these answers and you'll be fine. It's like it's not that simple anymore,
Hmm.
right? And
Hmm.
I think like the unfortunate thing, and I think eventually this will correct itself, but it's like a very gradual process, which is like I call it survivorship bias, which is like for any new person now who wants to break into finance,
Hmm.
it's very reasonable
Hmm.
for you to like the first thing you do is like go talk to the other people that have gotten into finance a year or two above you and ask them how they did it,
Hmm.
right? And they're gonna tell you how, oh yeah, I just memorized this guy or I just studied this guy. Just like you
Hmm.
said, like, hey Yash, make sure you know this like the back of your hand. Okay,
Hmm.
sure. But it's like for every person that got in by doing that, I can
Hmm.
probably find you nine other people that did
Hmm.
not get in by doing the
Hmm.
exact same things.
I agree. I agree.
Except the nine people that didn't get in by doing that, you're not going to them for advice. And you're not asking, like, hey, I know you failed. Why did you fail? Like, what didn't work for you? And then they would tell you, like, oh, well, I just memorized these guys and I went to the interview and then like it didn't work. Like, I didn't know how to answer the question. And so it's like, that's what I mean by survivorship bias. It's like we're only looking at like a very small segment of the people that this actually worked for, and then completely ignoring, like, oh, actually, most of the time this doesn't work.
I agree.
Right. And then that kind of like becomes this because I mean, trust me, we talked to so many students like, oh yeah, like I heard this is all I have to do.
Yeah,
Like, well, I understand why you're hearing that, but it's like, who are you asking, right?
I agree.
So anyway, I think that was that's like super insightful. Did you consider like other ways of getting this type of coaching aside from Wall Street Mastermind, or like were there other programs you looked at, or like was this the only one, and so it was like a pretty easy decision for you, or was this like a difficult decision for you, where you're like, oh, this looks good, but I'm not sure, like
Hmm.
if this is legit, is going to be good, because like obviously now you're on the other side,
Hmm.
and in hindsight you could be like, oh yeah, this is great, right? But
Hmm.
at the time, looking forward,
Hmm.
without having actually gone through it, like was that an easy decision for you, or like kind of talk to us about that?
For sure. Actually, so there was a lot of back and forth. I don't know if you remember, Sam, but we went a lot of back and forth with me, me asking like countless questions before I started. So it's definitely picking your brain on the program because I
Yeah.
had never seen anything like that. And if I'm being honest, when I did find the program, I was just, I felt like this was the fool's gold, this is just too good to be true. So I was, I was like, wait, this something like this exists, and I can get my questions asked. I can get mentorship without butchering my chances of breaking into the industry by asking someone in the industry and just making a horrible mistake.
Yeah.
And in the initial aspect of the evaluation, I definitely wanted to look around, and I think one of the things that uh, bringing sorry, like Wall Street Mastermind is very well positioned is that there's no direct, like, actual replicable model out there that does it as good as you guys do. And
Mm.
um one that I did consider was an alternative was I think I forget, was it Wall Street Oasis? I think they have this mentorship thing where you could get charged by the dollar by an hour.
Yeah.
And definitely a great resource to get by an hour for sure. But I think it was just when I sort of did the math, versus how much, hours would I actually require to get value out of it,
Mm,
versus, actually putting myself at risk of, I guess, showing vulnerability to people actually working in the industry and how that could have an impact. That was like a big decision factor for me was that, I wanted that sort of, I guess, a safety wall, where
mm.
my dumb questions are eliminated before I can start asking the smart ones, right? So I did.
You mean like if you were being mentored by someone who's already working at one of these Canadian banks and there are only so many Canadian banks out there.
Yeah, yeah, and I think Wall Street Oasis has a model of that kind. These are actual professionals working right now. They're
Right.
willing to, for a monetary compensation, willing to, lend you their time, by an hour usually, and yeah, they're going to give you whatever insight you require. But there's a caveat, right? Like, sure, you
Yeah.
can pay them by the hour, but if you mess up royally, they remember that, and then they're going to tell their peers. So that's just one thing that was a big thing for me, and I think one of the underrated aspects that I guess is not as out there for Wall Street Mastermind are two actually. One is the actual I wouldn't say peer feedback forum, but like a peer and the mentors, and Sam himself is involved in the, I guess, the Slack platform that we use,
Yeah.
just to ask questions, go back, like we have like a deals discussion, all of that going on. So that, I think, aspect is just not out there, like people dedicate their entire lives to build like a network of that kind and still are not able to get of that like magnitude
Mm,
and scale. So that was one thing that I was not aware of before getting into the program. Actually, that was a very pleasant surprise for me.
mm.
And I think second one was just the interview. This was a question I'd asked initially to, I forget the gentleman's name, but he also works for Wall Street Mastermind. I forget his name, but he was the initial point of contact for my questions. And
Joseph?
Joseph, yes. And I had questions about, like you guys told me about, interview prep and stuff. Like, how do I know what my benchmark is? Like, how do I know what my competition looks like?
Mm,
And one of the very, I guess, niche aspects, but highly appreciated, is the interview themselves. I think that happen on a periodic basis in the week. And I would always, try to make time and go attend them and see a couple of guys that I even connected with through the Wall Street Mastermind. Like, it's a great like connection. Everybody knows everyone, supporting each other. And
yeah.
for all the Canadian peers of mine that, were in the same spot interviewing and doing those processes, when Sam used to interview them, I used to take notes. Okay, like, this is how they really, kill their behaviorals. This is what they could improve. And in a lot of way, by mirroring their process, it also helped reduce sorry, help improve my efficiency in, preparing for my interviews, because there's only so many mock interviews you can go through again and again and do, reiterative feedback. It just kills a lot of time for you and for the person.
Yeah.
So that was definitely a great um uh aspect, the two aspects that I think we just, it's not as well known out there,
Yeah.
that I really appreciate. So in terms of that point, it definitely was a decision that I just was not sure about, because I hadn't had anyone in my circle that had tried it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, like looking back, I think if we're really comparing against all the alternatives, I took the best one. So no regrets there. I thank you for every bit of it.
No, that's awesome, man. And thanks for sharing that. Like, look, and I think the reason why I asked you that question is because exactly like you said, it's like, you go to Queens, you're in Canada. Like I said, it's not like we have a ton of
Mhm,
students that we worked with from Canada.
mhm,
Like, if you talk about schools like Wharton or NYU Stern or like a lot of these target schools in the States, like some schools we've worked with like
mhm,
40, 50 students.
mhm,
And it's like, if there's like 40, 50 other students from your school that have used this program,
mhm,
it's a lot easier for you to talk yourself into like doing this program, right?
mhm, mhm,
But like for someone like you who maybe like you don't know anyone else and you're like the
mhm,
literally the first person that's used it, like a lot of
mhm,
people don't like it's human nature to not want to be like the first one to try something or like
mhm.
to be like the early adopter or whatever.
For
Right?
sure.
Like, you think about the adoption curves, like there's
Mhm,
very small percentage of people that are on like the front
Definitely.
end of that curve. But a lot of times the early adopters also like reap the most rewards and the most
Benefits.
benefits,
Mhm,
right? It's like someday I honestly think like like programs like Wall Street Mastermind, and there are more and more people now
Mhm.
starting to like do stuff like this. Um, someday like you won't be an early adopter anymore when you do something like this. So just like, oh, everyone's doing this, and then it'll be less of a competitive advantage, to be completely honest.
I agree.
Right. And I think like, a couple other points to touch on in terms of what you just said. It's like, I think, yeah, like the hourly coaching model, I think that's been around forever,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I think that you already touched on some of the downside, which is, yeah, obviously, especially in a small market like Canada, maybe it's less of an issue here in the US, but in a
Mhm.
small market like Canada, where like you don't really want to be that vulnerable with like the people who might be evaluating or interviewing you, I think that's certainly valid.
Mhm.
But I think also when you do hourly, like the other thing is like these bankers, like their full-time job is to be a banker. Like
Mhm.
their
Mhm.
full-time job is not to help you get a job. And
Mhm.
so there's two downsides to that. One is like in these hourly arrangements, there typically is no like structure curriculum where they're like, hey, here's like everything you need to know and do it in this order and whatever. So it's like you probably come to the hourly session that you booked. You got
Mhm.
to come with like whatever questions you have,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And sometimes I think like if you just have like a handful of questions that you need answers to, like I think that could be a good format.
Mhm.
But I think like if you're actually trying to learn everything from like
Yeah.
beginning to end, a lot of times because you're still trying to learn those things, you actually don't know what questions you have. Like
Mhm.
you don't know what questions to ask because you don't know what you don't know. So
Mhm.
if you're not able to ask the right questions, like you might not get the information that you actually need. That's the difference between like asking questions ad hoc versus like having an actual curriculum that's structured and organized that you can go through to make sure you're not missing anything.
Mhm.
Right.
And
Yeah, sorry, you're gonna say something.
all good. No, and just to add to that, I think um a major aspect that a lot of I guess aspiring like finance professionals, like kids that are in school like me, that we don't know, that we don't realize initially, is that we don't even know what questions we want to ask. Like when you don't even know what you like, like where do I begin? And that's the thing. So when you get to these 1 hour like coaching sessions, half the time's trying to like gone trying to figure out, you get one question answered and then you have three subset from that.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to sort of keep up with that. And I think another um aspect of that is that very beautifully is combined is the program is that you're not having people that are dedicated just to education. These are people who have also worked in the industry and understand
Yeah.
internal mechanics of it, and that has been super helpful, because you're like, okay, this guy's dedicated to you know mentoring me and making sure I get a job, but at the same time he also knows what he's talking about, rather than
Right.
some guy who just set up shop just yesterday because that's all
Right.
he wants to do. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say like that's a great point. And I would say the other thing is like for someone that's maybe gonna like meet with you for an hour or
Hmm.
3 hours or 2 hours or whatever, and they have a
Hmm.
full-time job where they're making 6 to 7 figures, whereas meeting with you, I don't
Hmm.
know, you might be paying them, they might make like $100, $150 or whatever. It's like in the grand scheme of things, sure, they hope you do well, but
Hmm.
like whether you do well or not, it doesn't really matter to them, right? Like
Sure.
it's like I'm gonna meet you for now. I'm never gonna meet you again. If you don't get a job,
Hmm.
okay, like I made
Hmm.
my money, and in fact, this money doesn't even matter. If I don't make this money, it doesn't even matter. Like this is
Hmm.
not how I like put food on the table or whatever. And so it's just like ideally, I would say if you want someone to like mentor you, hopefully like not only are they qualified and experienced enough to mentor you, but like hopefully they're like really, really invested in your
Hmm.
outcome
For sure.
because it's gonna make them like try harder to, get you the job that you want.
Well, yeah.
And so I think that's like the other thing that's like somewhat of a big difference because like for me coaching you, like I don't work in banking. Like
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
is how I make a living. Like,
Hmm.
and if you don't get a job, like it actually makes me look bad, right?
Hmm.
And so
I
like
agree.
that's what I have to try really hard to get everyone jobs, right? And so I think the other thing too is like that you touched on is like kind of the community aspect,
Hmm.
right? And I think that kind of like the benefit of that is like I would say there's like several different ways that benefits you. One is like to our point earlier, sometimes you don't know what questions you have,
Hmm.
right? Because as when you're going through it for the first time, like you're
Hmm.
gonna have blind spots.
Hmm.
You don't know what you don't know. But
Hmm.
by being in this community, you're constantly going to see the questions that other people are asking around you.
Hmm.
And so, like, how many times have someone else asked the question on Slack, and then you look at it, you're like, "Oh, I
Oh,
didn't think
that's a
of
good
that
question.
question, but I
Yeah,
actually have the same question,
I agree.
right?"
That's
And then
happened to me a lot.
now you're like uncovering the stuff that's in your blind spot before. Whereas, like, if you weren't in that type of environment, like, you would have never been able to, you might have never figured that out,
For sure.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and then the other aspect of the community is like, to your point, the benchmarking aspect, right?
Hmm.
I think so many people they focus on um like doing mock interviews and like, to be honest, like everyone should do mock interviews, by the way, but like there's a diminishing marginal returns on every additional mock interview that you do,
Mhm,
right? Like the first mock interview is going to be like super impactful, and the second one like slightly less. Third one's like at some point, if all you're doing is like mock interviews by yourself,
mhm,
like you're not going to be improving that much from one
mhm,
to the next because
mhm,
you've already fixed all the things that you could possibly see. And then like the part that most people don't do, and the
mhm,
part that most people are missing is like that contextual awareness of like, this is how I'm answering my questions, but like, how does that stack up against how other people are doing it? Because
mhm,
it's like when you actually go through a real interview, they're
mhm,
not evaluating you in a silo. They're evaluating you against like the very next guy that they're interviewing right after you, and then the guy right after him. And they're usually interviewing like super days, like they're interviewing multiple people back to back. And it's like, okay, out of these 5 to 10 people, like who had the best answers?
mhm,
And so a lot of people, it's like you can get almost like this false confidence or false sense of security of like, oh yeah, I think my answer is pretty good. I practiced it like 20 times.
mhm,
And it's like, they might sound good to you, but what if like it's not as good as the next guys, right? And so like to your point, being able to like watch how other people mock interview on a week in and week out basis actually helps you calibrate where you yourself are truly at, right? And like how many times do you like hear someone else's answer and you're like, oh, well, I thought my answer for that was pretty good, but like this guy's answer is even better. And like
way better.
I can like not like copy it because obviously not everyone's answer is gonna be the same, but like I can this inspires me to go make certain changes about my answer to like make it even
Mhm,
better than it already is. Right.
for sure.
And so I think
And that's
like,
happened to me before. That's happened to me like a lot of times where I'm listening to other international students and the way they just beautifully, craft their stories and, how you give feedback, that helps me like, sort of help, I guess, just improve mine as well. That is true to me.
yeah,
So,
for sure. For sure. That's awesome, man. So I guess I know we only have a few minutes left. So the last question I really want to end on is just now that you're on the other side and you've gotten an offer that you're really happy with. I think a lot of people would really love to be in the position that you're in at the end of the recruiting process. So I always like to ask, like, what's the best piece of advice that um, either you've ever gotten from someone else,
hmm
or that maybe you just figured out on your own along the way that you kind of want to pass on to the
hmm
people that are still going through recruiting now, or maybe even younger people that are thinking about recruiting but they haven't started but they will be in the future, like anything
hmm
like that where you can just shed a piece of insight that's gonna save other people a lot of heartache, I
hmm
guess.
Fair enough. I think I think this is a testament that I kind of live by now, and I was given by, I was given this advice by someone that I was, I guess being mentored by, and it was, I guess, in a very short way was, hard work alone does not pay off. You need to make sure the hard work's in the right direction.
Mm,
And I think this is very important in terms of just being efficient. I think just how we are as students, we're often, obviously hard work is a very essential element, but if you're running but in the wrong direction, that does not take you closer to where you want to be just because you're running.
mm,
And I think if there's anything that we can, for anyone that's that's interested in the advice, would be, if you can somehow find a way to optimize what you're learning and how you can incorporate in, being faster at what you're doing and being more efficient at what you're doing, that combined with hard work is just gonna, triple X your speed at achieving what you want, and then can help you achieve much larger goals.
yeah.
So, hard work, right direction. And the way I think I would seek it is definitely mentorship. I think
Mm.
it's a very underrated aspect, as I think the arrogance of youth, they call it, is that I know everything. I think letting go of that and then finding people who've done it that can really,
Mm,
really help you achieve things a lot quicker where your efforts in the right direction.
mm.
Um, yeah, so that's all for me.
That's, man, that is good. That is a really good one because sometimes we ask people this question and then they give like, oh yeah, just I wish I started earlier or something, not like not super actionable like that. But dude, that's honestly, there's a lot of wisdom in what you said because we do hear a lot of students sometimes like, well, I'm sure if I work hard, like I'll
hmm
be able to, achieve whatever I want. And I think like that's only like that statement is only partially true, right? Like because I think a lot of us have been conditioned to believe that hey, as long as I work hard, I can do anything, which is like actually in reality,
hmm
that's not how the real world works. Like in the real world, hard work is actually just like table stakes.
For
Hard
sure.
work is just like, if you don't work hard, there's nothing else to talk about. But I know so many people that work hard
Hmm.
and like they're not super like, dude, we can all think about, I mean, you're an immigrant, right? I'm an immigrant. Like, how many immigrant parents from like our parents' generation do we know that work extremely hard?
Hmm.
And like, are they like super successful in terms of like the, at least like if you want to measure it by, I'm not saying this is the only way to measure
Hmm.
success, but like if you want to measure success by like wealth or
Hmm.
status or whatever, like
Hmm.
does every hardworking person you know in your life have
For
those
sure.
things? It's like, no,
No.
right? And so like hard work is like table stakes. If you don't have that, there's nothing else to talk about.
Hmm.
But the analogy you gave is so great. It's like if I run really, really hard, but I'm running in the opposite direction because I don't know where I'm going, then I'll just end up like further and further away from where I need to be.
For sure.
Right. And I think like that's what a lot of people actually are doing when it comes to
Uh,
recruiting. It's like they work really, really hard and they spend, I've heard examples of people spending like hundreds of hours memorizing the 400
mhm.
questions guide.
Oh, yeah.
Are they
I've
hardworking? Like,
For sure.
absolutely. You spend hundreds of hours memorizing these answers. Is that going to help you pass your interviews? Like, no, probably not. Right. And then so it's like, that's actually the worst because you worked hard and you don't have anything to show for it.
Hmm.
Versus if you could work equally hard, but have actual results that would have been much better than the one that you could have gotten on your own. Like, isn't that what it's all about?
I agree.
Right. And so I think like the arrogance of youth point that you brought up too is like, yeah, like if I really think about, because I feel like I know a lot of people around me that are really successful. I think like ironically, it's all the most successful people that have the least ego about like learning from other people that are more successful than them.
Uh-huh.
And then the least successful people usually have the most ego. And that's also why they're the least successful because they're like, oh, I'm just gonna figure everything
Screen.
out myself.
I
And
agree.
I'm the best and I don't need to learn from anyone else. And it's like, if honestly, like in life, like, and even after you get out into the real world and you start working, like
Hmm.
it's all about mentorship. Like you want to move
Absolutely.
up, you
Hmm.
need someone who's senior,
Hmm.
who wants takes you under their wings and teaches you the tricks of the trade and helps you avoid like the common pitfalls that you would have made otherwise. Is like that's just invaluable, right?
Hmm.
And if you can, regardless, I'm not, and look, I'm not saying you can't be successful if you do everything on your own. I'm sure there are
For sure.
people that have been,
Hmm.
but I've never met anyone who said like, okay, give me two options. One way is like I can get to the end goal faster, and one way is I can get to the end goal slower, and I'm going to take the slower and harder way. Like,
Hmm.
why? Right? Like, especially with recruiting, especially in Canada, where there's not a lot of opportunities, but even in the US, typically like the way recruiting works is like the longer it takes you to get the offer, the fewer good options you're going to have left because like they get filled up and they get taken by other people. And then you have to move further and further downstream in terms of like the selection, right? Or like the opportunities that are available. So it's like, that's why there's urgency and that's why efficiency matters. It's like,
I
even
agree.
if I gave everyone all the time in the world and there's no time constraint and it's like, go learn everything you need to learn to be successful in career, like, I'm sure people could figure out eventually.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, like you're under a lot of time constraint, in which
Hmm.
case, like speed matters, right?
Absolutely. You gotta get to it
So
first.
anyway, I think that's such good advice, dude. So thank you for sharing that. I think, guys, for those of you that are still with us, if what we've been talking about resonates with you, like, and you understand the value of not just like memorizing concepts, but like actually truly learning everything you need to know to the point where you can actually teach it to other people, to the point where it's actually application knowledge. And you also understand, you know, the importance of not just hard work, but being efficient with your process and kind of like the importance and the beneficial the benefits that you have from having mentorship, then I want to encourage you to reach out to our team. You can schedule a free consultation with us where we'll just learn more about your situation, talk about what your recruiting goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, what challenges you're currently having. Um, and then like, you know, based on depending on what you tell us, like at a minimum, we'll come up with like a what you know, just like a game plan for what we think you should be doing. And then it's on you to decide, like, hey, if you want our help to implement that with you, or if you want to take that and go on and run with it on your own, like either or is fine. But at a minimum, then you at least have like a better idea of okay, this is the roadmap and this is what I should be doing and this is the direction I should be going in, right? And so if that's something that you guys are interested in, you can book that free consultation at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The streets abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to helping you. All right. So with that said, Yash, uh, thank you so much for taking an entire hour almost out of your work day. It looks like you're the only person in the office, so hopefully, hopefully you're not
That's
getting in trouble. But no, we really appreciate you taking the time, and this has been super fun for me just to kind of like chat with you about your journey, and I'm really excited and happy for you about where you ended up, and I just look forward to seeing kind of what you accomplish going forward, and
Thank you, Sam.
obviously if there's anything else that we can help you with as you progress in your along in your career, like you know how to find us, and feel free to reach out and don't be a stranger.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Sam. Appreciate everything. The interview today as well was very insightful, and I think the course itself has done volumes for more than I can speak for what it's done for me. So thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you for giving us the opportunity. So, guys, that's gonna be it for today. We're gonna wrap it up here, and thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll be back with more of these for you guys until next time. All right, talk soon.